Hello, Booktube. Hello, friends. Welcome to LizziefayeLovesBooks. I'm Elizabeth. And this is a little different than my normal TBRs and wrap-up type videos and book hauls and stuff. And I don't know if it's going to come out before or after my end of the month wrap-up for August. Because I read and listened to so many books in August, I thought I would just break it down a little bit and do a couple of themed videos based on some of the books that I read, because it made me think of other books that I read in the past and books that I want to read in the future. And so today's video is about knitting, or more specifically, books about knitting. So I learned to knit when I was about 6 years old. My mom was the home economics teacher in our little town of Bennington, Oklahoma. And one of the things that she was supposed to do, was a part of her job, was to facilitate some type of adult education, because she was a vocational home economics teacher. So she not only had the job of teaching high school classes, she also needed to facilitate some type of adult education. So she didn't have to teach an adult class, but she had to make it happen. So she enlisted the help of a woman in our town. Her name was Martha Rudolph, and Martha Rudolph was a knitter. So my mom asked her, hey, would you come and teach a knitting class? So Martha Rudolph was the woman who actually taught me to knit, and I believe she probably taught my mother to knit as well. My mom might have already dabbled in it a little bit, but Mrs. Rudolph was the main teacher of the class, and that class continued to meet and sort of became a social event for the women of our little town for many years to come, for as long as my mom was teaching. And then I think it may have even continued on after she retired, because it just kind of took on a life of its own. Now, my mom had been teaching home economics since the 1950s. I was 6 years old in about 1971, and I'm not sure if she had a requirement to facilitate an adult class before then, or if that was something new, but that was when it started. I remember being 6 years old and learning how to knit, and I would go with my mom almost every week. We would go to this class, not every time, especially as I got older, but I continued to go as long as I was home until I went to college. And then whenever I would sometimes come home for college, if it was going on, I think it only usually met during the school year, but if I was ever at home and there was a knitting class, even as I was, grown and moved, I would still go, because it was just a lot of fun to see the women again and to reminisce about those times. Now, my first knitting project that I attempted was probably what you would call a slipper. We called them house shoes, and just that fast, house shoes. What I'm really saying is house shoes, which to most people would be slippers, but we called them house shoes. And I don't think I ever finished the first one because it was a mess. I think I even still have it, or maybe my mom kept it. I don't know. I have run across it a couple of times over the years, and I couldn't tell you where it is now, or if I threw it away or whatever, but it was a mess. But it was my practice project, and I learned to knit trying to make that house shoe. And I think I eventually did make a pair that I could actually wear. And then, over the years, like when I was in school, I made some toboggan caps and various things. But the thing I really wanted to make, I never had a desire to make a sweater, but I did knit an afghan. Some people would call it a blanket. And I made it in a leaf pattern, which is basically where you knit these little leaf-shaped or kite-shaped pieces, and then you sew them all together. And I remember Mrs. Rudolph telling me, now, when you get a few made, you ought to start sewing them together, because it'll get really tiresome sewing those all together once you're done. And I was like, no, I want to get them all made and lay them out, then I'll start sewing them together. Well, she was right. She knew what she was talking about. It took me 15 years to make this afghan. Let me show it to you. You might think I was making this for a baby. I just like these colors. And of course, these are what you would traditionally think of as baby colors. But I started it when I was pretty young, and I think I finished it at some point before I got married. But it's much wider at one end than the other because my tension changed. The tension on my needles changed over the years. But I just love these colors, and I always thought, well, it's baby colors, so if I have a baby, then I'll use it for the baby. But I ended up making it so big that it's just too big and heavy for a baby. So as a result, it really never gets used. It just sits in the closet. But anyway, this was my first big project, and at least it's done. So one of the things that my mom would have people start with when they were learning to knit was a dishcloth. And I do have a few dishcloths. People have made them for me, and I've made some on my own. So I found this blanket pattern that basically is like a really big dishcloth. It's got the same kind of edging that the dishcloths do, but it's a slightly different pattern, and it's a full size. So this is one I made for Katie when she was a baby. I made a pink one for Emily, and I didn't want to make Katie the same color, so I made her yellow. Well, then it turns out, hindsight, 2020 and all, she's like, I never really like yellow. I like pink. But I had made the pink one for Emily, and I couldn't take it back. Anyway, so I have made a couple more of those for other people. I'm pretty sure I made at least one for one of Randy's nieces, and those are pretty quick to make. I remember having my knitting at work sometimes when I was at Disney, and I would be knitting. But it had really been several years since I had made anything. And Katie was wanting to learn to knit, and I told her that I would help her knit. And so I said, well, we need to start with a dishcloth. So we each bought a skein of yarn, and we started a dishcloth. Those are still half done because I'm determined not to knit mine all and finish it until I can show her. The problem is she's left-handed, and it's really hard for a right-handed knitter to teach someone who's left-handed how to knit. So I don't know how we're going to accomplish that. But she bought some yarn. I'm trying to remember which one she bought first. I think it was this one. I think right after COVID or kind of during that time, she bought this big yarn cake at Michael's because she thought that it just took one yarn cake to make an afghan. Turns out it takes two, and you need two coordinating colors. But anyway, she kept that in her closet because I said, don't start that until I teach you how to knit. And it's a good thing because I have even had a hard time with this one. But anyway, finally, a few years later, she was cleaning out her closet, and she brings it into me, and she's like, will you knit it for me? And I was like, yes. Well, it took me a little while to get into it because it's kind of a difficult pattern. And I had several false starts. I would knit some, and it wasn't right, and I'd rip it out. And finally, I got the first 4 rows done, and I was ready to start the second color, which, by the way, is here. I ordered this on eBay because these apparently were limited edition yarn balls. So I found another one that coordinates with it. It's slightly different, but close enough that it should blend nicely. And I was ready to tie in the other color, and I just was, I'm a perfectionist. I wanted to do it right. And so finally, last month, at book club, I took this with me because I've been reading all these knitting books for August, and I took it with me, and I got one of the ladies at book club who always brings her knitting to make sure that I did it correctly. So now I'm happy to say that I have switched back and forth with the colors a couple of times, and I have a few rows done on this afghan for Katie. And so here it is. It's I already forgot what size needles they are, but anyway, it's on circular needles, and now I've done the beginning and the ending stuff is what's harder, and now I'm just on the repeat pattern, which is not too difficult. So yay, I'm knitting again. So let me show you the books that got me back into knitting. The first two are the first 2 books in a YA knitting themed trilogy called Chicks with Sticks. I had listened to the first book a while back, a couple of years ago probably. It's called It's a Pearl Thing, and it was okay. I didn't love it, but it was okay. And I had the other one, which is Knit Two Together. I think both of these books are on Hoopla, and at least one of them is on Audible Plus. I think the first one. So I just had not gotten around to reading the second one, and it was in my 60 by 60 box. So I went ahead and listened to the first one again on Audible Plus, and then I listened to the second one, Knit Two Together, on Hoopla, and I enjoyed them more the second time around. They're just basically about these high school girls who are just trying to navigate their way through high school, with various problems. Each of them have different issues, and of course boyfriends come into it and all of that. And one of them in the very beginning is grieving over the loss of her aunt, I believe. And either her aunt had tried to get her into knitting, or someone else suggests that she take up knitting just as part of the grieving process. So she does, and she ends up finding these other girls, and they are all kind of knitting for various reasons, working through issues and stuff. So it turned out to be really good. There is a third book called Knitwise. It's not on audio anywhere that I can find, and I can't even find the book. I could probably order it on eBay or something, which I might end up eventually doing just because I'd like to finish the series. So this was the first two things that I read. And also, near the beginning of the month, I started reading in print Unraveled by Maggie Sefton, which is book 9 in her knitting mystery series. It's a cozy mystery series with a knitting theme. And it had been a couple of years since I had picked up one of these books. I really enjoyed the first few. I don't remember if I got my sister reading them or she got me reading them. We've both read most of them. But the last 2 or 3 have not been that good, at least in my opinion. So I will tell you, long story short, I did end up enjoying this one more than the last 2 or 3. So I'm glad that I persevered and stuck with it. I've still got a few more left to read, and I will definitely plan to go ahead and finish the series. But this is set in Colorado. It's about a young woman who is an accountant, and she inherits a cottage that is right next door to a knitting shop. And so she started going there and met the people there and everything, and took up knitting as kind of a side, as kind of a way to balance out her life that's full of accounting and numbers. It gives her something creative to do. And of course, she stumbles onto dead bodies and things like that. So you know how the average cozy mystery goes. Anyway, I've enjoyed these for the most part, and I'm glad that I picked back up with the series. It always includes a knitting pattern and maybe even sometimes a recipe. I'm not sure. But so I read Unraveled mainly because I needed to pick up the series again, and I've been doing this ABC challenge with the Killing Time with Cozies group. I'm way behind everybody else. Everybody else is long ago done, but I'm reading in ABC order, and I was up to you, and this is the one that I had planned to read for you. So I'm glad that I got it done. This one wasn't one of my 60 by 60 books, but I had another one on my 60 by 60 list that had to do with knitting, so I decided to go ahead and listen to it next. The Knitting Circle by Anne Hood. Now, I did not love this one. This one had a lot of too much information moments. These women sitting around talking about things that, I would rather keep private, that kind of thing. But there was a lot of drama and a lot of issues and discussions and things. It was really just a straight up women's fiction book, but with maybe a little too much information at times. Anyway, they were knitting, and the people in this book were joining this knitting circle as a therapeutic way to work through various issues and bereavements and things like that. So knitting can be very therapeutic. So now I want to chat a little bit about some of the other knitting books that I have read, and some that I own, and some that I've heard about. Some I've liked, some I haven't liked. Because while we're talking about knitting books, why not just talk about as many as I can? Now, this is by no means an exhaustive list of books about knitting. Of course, there are nonfiction books with knitting patterns, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about fiction books with a knitting theme. So since this one is a cozy mystery series, let me first just mention a few other cozy mystery series that I know of with a knitting theme. One that comes to mind is a series that I actually own several of, And this is the Seaside Knitters Mystery Series by Sally Goldenbaum. This series is set in Sea Harbor, Massachusetts. I have collected most of these and I have not read a single one. I love the covers though. This is one of the only ones I don't have in hardcover. But look at this one, the wedding shawl. Isn't that just gorgeous? I absolutely love this cover and most of the other covers as well. So I need to read those. There are a few other knitting mysteries that I've read that I don't own anymore. One of them is The Haunted Yarn Shop by Molly McRae. This is one of my favorite cozy mystery series. Now, I don't read a lot of things with ghosts in them, but Geneva, the ghost in this series, is so persnickety and obstinate at times and just hilarious that I have recommended this series quite a few times. It's very paranormal light. It does have the ghost, but that's about it. And the ghost has her own mystery that is solved over the course of the series. Anyway, this series is delightful and I highly recommend it, even though I am really not one to recommend series with ghosts or anything supernatural in them. This one's an exception. Another series that I've read completely is the Needlecraft Mysteries by Monica Ferris. Most of these are not about knitting specifically. Each book features a different type of needlework, and the very last book, which is called Knit Your Own Murder, is about knitting, that the crime takes place around knitting, and the featured needlework in that particular book is about knitting. And I wouldn't say this is a series you should read out of order. You probably could. If you're the type who doesn't really care whether you read in order or not, then you'd probably be fine. If you like to read in order, then don't start with this one because I think that's the very last one in the series. I think it's number 19. But it was a fun series. I didn't love every book in the series, but I did enjoy it for the most part. And then another cozy mystery series that I have read entirely. It's a 3-book series called The Handcrafted Mysteries by Holly Quinn. And again, each of these has to do with a different type of needlework. I think one's probably crochet, one's knitting, and maybe one's quilting. But anyway, the one that's specifically about knitting is Crafter Knits a Clue, and the murder weapon, of course, in that one is a knitting needle. So you might want to pick that up if that sounds interesting to you. But my first foray into knitting literature was with Debbie Maycomber. I believe it was my sister who recommended The Shop on Blossom Street to me. That was my very first Debbie Maycomber book. It's about a woman named Lydia who owns a yarn shop, and she is battling cancer, and she starts a knitting class, and 3 of the participants who come become just her core friend group, and it is just a really good book. It's continued on, her story is continued on in the second book, which is A Good Yarn, and I just highly recommend both of those books. Now, it's about a 10-book series with some novellas, and the other books sort of branch out into other businesses on Blossom Street and other characters, but Lydia comes back in and makes appearances in some of the other later books. But those first 2 books are really just about knitting and the friendships that take place around knitting and in the yarn shop, and I just highly recommend them. So after reading and loving those 2 Debbie Maycomber books, I kind of had my eyes out for other books with a knitting theme. So the next one I stumbled onto was The Friday Night Knitting Club by Kate Jacobs. Now, I did not love this one. This one came out in 2008, and that could have something to do with it. That was the year my mom passed away. But I remember just having it in my head that I wanted to read something that I would be able to recommend to my mother, you know, if I could still recommend books to her, because we used to recommend books back and forth, and we enjoyed chatting about books and things like that, much like I do with my sister now. And this book had the F word, I think twice, and I was appalled that such a wonderful, you know, old-fashioned subject as knitting could be fouled up with foul language. And, you know, I was such a naive reader then. Even though I had kids, I just expected that a book about knitting would be more old-fashioned than that. And I was just frustrated that the F word was in that book. And so I never read the second one. I don't know if it's good or not. I was chatting with someone later on, a few years later, when I was doing book sales at the library, and that book came through our donations, and I remember saying to one of the ladies, I read that book, I just didn't like it. She goes, yeah, I didn't like it either. And I said, well, the reason I didn't like it was because it had the F word in it. She goes, oh, I didn't care about that. I just didn't think it was a good book. So I was at least glad, I was kind of validated to know that, you know, there were other things about it that people might not like. But as I recall, it was about, you know, women sitting around knitting and chatting about their problems and things like that. Much like the Anne Hood book that I read this past month. So, you know, if I read it again, it probably would not be nearly as bad as I made it out to be back then. But like I said, was a naive reader. I had not read a lot of stuff that had a lot of foul language in it. Now, because of book club and everything, you know, I've pretty much read the gamut, but I still don't like it. I don't like the F word at all, but you know, I've been exposed to it a little bit more, so it's not as shocking, I suppose. When I was getting ready to edit this video, I remembered one more set of knitting related books that I own. I have not read any of these, but this is a trilogy by Gil McNeil, The Beach Street Knitting Society and Yarn Club. Book 2 is Needles and Pearls, and book 3 is Knit One, Purl One. I can't believe I forgot these because this first book was even on my BookTube spin list, and I was supposed to read it a couple of years ago. It's been in my book cart for a couple of years now. But I think Chloe from Always Booked has read it, and I think she rated it 3 stars. So I'm still looking forward to reading these. I just have never been able to find them on audio, so I just haven't gotten around to starting this trilogy. But then to finish off, let me tell you about 2 books on my shelf that I have not read, but I think are faith-based. And I hope that these are going to be good recommendations for you. If you've read them, let me know, because I have not read these yet, but I'm excited to. It's a duology, and I'm not even sure which one came first. I think probably this one, The Sweet Gum Knit Lit Society. These are by Beth Patillo, and it is Patillo. I looked it up because I was like, I don't know if it's Patillo or Patillo, but I found a video of her introducing herself, and it's Patillo. Anyway, I guess this one is probably book 2, Knit for Love. And when I got these, I just love the covers. I didn't even really think about them being about knitting, but I did a little search for books about knitting, and these came up, and I was like, oh, I have those. I should read them. So if you've read these or either one of them, let me know, and let me know what you thought of them. But they are by Waterbrook Press, which is a faith-based publisher. So I'm hoping that those will be really good. Anyway, there are so many other books with a knitting theme that I have barely scratched the surface. But let me know if you have read any books with a knitting theme, or if you are looking for some, or let's just chat about books with a knitting theme in the comments. So that's all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a great day. Read a good book, and God bless you.